Hi everybody, thanks for coming. Today I'm going to take a look at creating what could, with a traditional CAD system, be a fairly complicated model to try and make. And it's kind of a pair of sewing scissors. And primarily I'm going to focus on the handles because that's where most of the organic stuff is going on. And if we have some time at the end, then I'll go into looking at the blades. I think we're going to try and pull this in right under an hour, Matt. And so I'll keep an eye on the clock, and if we have time, I'll go into the blades. But I want to focus on the handles because I want to show you what I consider to be a really drop-dead simple workflow for creating stuff like this, that if you are a beginner and you are just getting into 3D modeling for the first time, or if you're an experienced NURBS modeler getting into T-Splines, there's a little bit of a learning curve as far as the workflow and how to think about and how to plan a model like this. And there's a couple of interesting things in this model. The shape of these handles is, first of all, it's a very organic shape, and it's continually blending. And you'll notice that there's a little a here that kind of rolls into this Y branch that then connects. And then we have a sharp edge down here, and then the same thing around here. There's a little dip, and then there's a sharp edge around this, and then there's a little dimple sticking out here to keep the scissors from closing down on your palm. And stuff like that. So if you think about this from a NURBS point of view, it's like, yeah, you could lay this out with curves and do it with blends and all that, but you'd have a million fillets and a million blends and all this kind of stuff, and it's like by the time you got done with this model, trying to edit it, if you did an RP part and stuck it on somebody and found out that your thumb doesn't fit in here for some reason, then you'd have to tear this whole model apart, rebuild this, reblend it, move this all around and stuff like that, and it's a destructive workflow as far as trying to get an iteration or trying to get a modification. The thing about T-splines is you get this kind of magical genie in a bottle kind of power where you have this 3D model that can be pulled around like clay and updated very, very rapidly just by grabbing some edges and stuff like that. And I'll show you how to do that and show you how easy it is as we get into this. But let's talk a little bit about how this model is going to lay out and the workflow behind it. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the orange part right now. I'm going to think about kind of how this lays out, and I'm going to look at kind of the center line right through here. And I'm going to want to have a little bit of detail over here and a little bit of detail over here, and then I'm going to want this model to split apart and come around and then join here and split apart and come around and join here. So as I'm laying out my faces, I'm going to want to keep that in mind so that I've got some options for adding this dent detail in here and how that wraps together. And if you've seen any of the other workflows or any of the other tutorials that I've done, I've kind of been calling this the append face workflow, and it's one of my favorite ways to work because it's just absolutely positively dumb simple, really, really powerful results, and it gets you up and flying without having to really know too much about the software. So for me, when I evaluate a piece of software, I'm always like, how much can I do before I open the manual and start getting into this? And this workflow here, essentially you could start doing some really pretty awesome stuff really, really quickly with only about 3 or 4 tools. Before we jump into that, I just want to go over the heads-up display and how the interface works and all that kind of stuff really quickly.
Kyle, just to jump in, which version of T-Splines are you using for this?
I believe this is V3 because it overwrote my V2 install.
Okay. We just as far as where T-Splines for Rhino is, version 2 is the commercially released version of T-Splines. We do have a work in progress beta version of T-Splines version 3, which it looks like Kyle has opened up right now. But the tools that he's using will be the same tools that you'll find in version 2. You won't use any of the new version 3 tools. And just if you're evaluating T-Splines right now, anyone that buys T-Splines version 2 right now will get a free upgrade to T-Splines version 3 when it comes out in a few months. So,
great. So basically the tools and everything that you see in here, the layout of how this toolbar is set up is a little bit different than in version 2, but all the tools are the same. And I'll refer to them by name so that you can find them either in the toolbar or underneath the T-Splines menu up here. So let's talk a little bit about the heads-up display. And one of the first things I always like to point out to everybody is that there's a hotkey for the heads-up display. You can either click the Manipulate button over here, which brings up the heads-up display, and then click through the different options, or you can hit the Control space bar, which I always do, and it always shows up in the audio for these recordings of me clacking away on the keyboard here. But the hotkey Control space bar is really nice because it allows you to really quickly, kind of in a two-handed workflow fashion, switch back and forth between T-Splines commands and Rhino commands. When the heads-up display is enabled, T-Splines commands have priority. If you have hotkeys set up, for instance, for your views, in my case, I have my modeling window set up on hotkeys: T for top, R for right, P for perspective, and F for front. Those coincide with T-Splines commands, and if the heads-up display is up and I hit the T key, for instance, it's going to invoke the T-Splines hotkey command. The way to get around that is to either Control spacebar, hotkey the heads-up display away, which gives Rhino commands the priority again, or I can hover in the command line and enter a T-Splines command or a Rhino command that will temporarily disable the T-Splines commands. Or I can hit the backslash key, which is right above the Enter key on the right-hand side of your keyboard for most Windows-based keyboards, and that temporarily disables T-Splines commands as well. The Escape key makes the heads-up display disappear. Command spacebar brings it back up. So let's take a look real quickly at what we have in here, and you'll notice that if I drag select this curve, there's a selection indicator down here that tells me what I'm selecting, and this is really important as we get in, and we'll refer to this a couple of more times, especially when you're welding verts and troubleshooting a problem that you may come up with as you're developing this model. Refer to your selection indicator here to make sure that in a case of welding vertices, if you have 2 or 3 verts stacked on top of each other, it may look like one vert in the window, but if you drag select it and you'll see that there's 3 verts here, then that's a good way to troubleshoot if there's a problem with your model. Right now the manipulator is hidden. If I click up here and bring it up to translate, you'll notice that I have a left-right translate and an up-down translate because I'm in an orthographic view right now. If I was in a 3D view, I'd have a third arrow on that triad that would allow me to move in 3D space. I can either constrain by a world axis, or if I go in the center here, it's unconstrained. Or if I use this construction plane icon, I can translate around the construction plane as I'm moving without translating in 3D space. Excuse me. If I click to the rotate icon, obviously it gives me the circle here, and if I click on the circle, it allows me to rotate. Also, if you double-click on a translator, you'll notice up in the command line up here, it'll give you an option for entering keyboard manipulations. So I can either enter degrees here, I can enter 20 degrees, and it'll rotate 20 degrees. If I do negative 20 degrees, it'll rotate negative 20 degrees. Same thing with the scale and translate manipulators. If I double-click on one of the axes, I can move in a numerical fashion. So if you have to control it by numbers, you can do that. If I click one more time, I get scale. Obviously the same thing. I can scale in 1D in either direction of my orthogonal view. Let me go into a perspective view just so. I'm going to backslash, hit the P key, which allows me to hotkey into my perspective view. So you'll notice that, I have a 3D triad manipulator here, and I can pick which axis that I'm manipulating by, or I can manipulate in 2D just on the construction plane here, or I can manipulate in 3D by grabbing the base icon there. One more click hides the manipulator. Sometimes that's nice to get it out of the way if you don't want to deal with it. If you need to deal with something with a pointer, a selection, or something like that, sometimes it's nice to hide. There are hotkeys for that. And if you look at your keyboard in the upper left-hand corner, you'll notice the Q, W, E, R, and T keys. Those are the hotkeys for translating through this. The Q hides it. The W gives you translate. The E gives you rotate. The R gives you scale. And the T key allows you to move the manipulator. You'll notice when I hit the T key, the manipulator disappears. It says pick a point. I'm going to move it down here, and that allows me to change where my manipulator is in the modeling window. Particularly effective for scaling and rotating. And then underneath that, we have the mode, and you can pick objects, verts, which we'll get into, edges, which we'll get into, faces, which we'll get into, but basically just wanted to demonstrate through that to access the different aspects of your T-Splines model. Those are also hotkey accessible by hitting the A, S, D, or F keys, A being verts, S being edges, D being faces, and F being objects. Underneath it, you'll notice there's a multiplier. What this does is adjust the feedback rate between the manipulator and the object. For instance, if I turn on the points for this curve, and I pick this, hit my W key, which hotkeys me to translate, and I move this point, you'll notice that it's a one-to-one relationship. As I move the manipulator, the point moves in a one-to-one connection. If I change this multiplier, say, to 5, as I move one unit, you'll notice that the manipulator is moving 5 times faster than my motion. So if you have to do a gigantic transformation, you can change the multiplier. It's actually much more useful to cut the multiplier down to like 0.1. So if you have to make tiny adjustments, it allows you to really get in and nail down your detail because you have a much slower reaction of the object to the manipulator. So it allows you to do really fine adjustments, especially if you're doing like jewelry or you're doing a character that has to have an expression. Sometimes you need to get in and just really kind of make microscopic adjustments to get the right feel out of it. So I'm going to set this back to 1 so we have a one-to-one relationship, which is typically where I work. And then we have a couple of different drag modes in here. I can drag on the construction plane. If I click again, I can drag by the view, which is nice if you're doing 3D translations on an object that's not oriented directly to a world axis. You can work UVN, which you can work off the UV isoparametric data on the surface, or normal by using the blue. Typically I work in world or view, because the view is really nice actually, because you can work basically whatever view the camera's in, that's where your 2D manipulation is going to happen. And then we'll get into soft manipulation a little bit because it's easier to see once I have some actual geometry on the screen other than a curve. And then hotkeys, it's either enabled or disabled. If it's disabled, obviously your Rhino hotkeys are going to take precedence. If it's enabled, your T-Spline's hotkeys are going to be taking precedence, and you'll have to either use the backslash, the hover, or hide the heads-up display in order to get that working. So that's a little bit about the heads-up display, and that's primarily where most of your interface is going to come from when you're dealing with T-Splines, because there's a lot of make stuff and move stuff in this workflow. It's much more kind of picking a control point and moving it around, or picking an edge and moving it around, or something like that, than it is like a typical NURBS workflow where you're making an object, trimming a hole in it, building something off of it, and filleting it. This is a much more kind of clay-like workflow. So let's jump into this this append face workflow, and let's look at kind of how this works and what it does. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by making a single face using the append face tool, which is here, or in the I never use these. Here it is, down here. And basically what it says is, it says point number 1, and basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make 4 points. I'm going to just drop them in here roughly where I want, kind of respecting my center line, and you'll notice that it made a face. And I can pick these edges, I can pick these verts, since I'm in vert mode, and move it around to get kind of basically what I want. And then I'm going to go to edge mode. I'm going to pick an edge. Then I'm going to hold down the Alt key. And when I hold down the Alt key, it's going to allow me to extrude an edge and make another face. And the reason I want to do that is because I'm going to make a bunch of little patches and basically create this flat like a paper doll, and then I'm going to add some thickness to it and then manipulate it to get my shape. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key over the C-plane manipulate icon here, and I'm just going to drag out another face, and you'll notice that it kind of updates as I go. And I'm just going to kind of pull something in here. I'm going to pull another one up here. And now I have to kind of figure out, how am I going to get around this? Well, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to change into verts mode, and I'm going to grab a vert, and I'm going to move this vert up here so that it kind of is starting to turn the corner like that. I'm going to go back to my edge mode. I'm going to start pulling some more out of here. I'm not going to worry a whole lot about how this stuff is, you know, scaling or lining up right now, because it's all going to kind of come together as I go. But what I want to do is kind of pay a little bit of attention about how my flow layout is going. And you'll notice as I pull this next one up, scoot down here a little bit. As I pull this next one up, I need to start kind of going around the corner. So I'm gonna go to my rotate manipulator by hitting the E key or clicking up here in the Headsup Display. I'm going to turn this a little bit so that it's kind of radial and its heading's kind of towards the center. Go back to my translate icon by hitting the W key. And then maybe at this point I want to get into my verts and start getting a little bit more of a feel for the thinness of this part. Again, I'm not worried a whole lot about this transition right now. That's kind of ganky, but we're gonna fix it. And maybe pull out another one here. And again, I want to get this to start turning the corner, so I'm going to hit the E key or click up in my Heads-up Display to get my rotate. I'm going to turn this here. I'm going to go to my W, Alt drag again, and go to my E key, hotkey, or click the manipulator up here again to allow it to rotate. And that's kind of half my model right now. And the beautiful thing about this workflow is once you have your basic kind of paper doll laid out, you're like 90% of the way there. So I'm just going to do some quick adjustments here using the translate manipulator. Again, I'm not going to worry a whole lot about this because this is going to change once we weld it to the other side. And so I have a couple of options. I can do another append face and make another row out here, or I can use these faces that I already have and use that as a basis for the other one. So let's do that. I'm going to hide this curve for right now. And then I'm going to go into edge mode, and I'm going to pick these 4 edges, bring up my manipulate icon, and I'm going to alt drag off those 4 edges. And you'll notice a couple of things that happen. 1, I get 4 new faces, which is what I wanted. And 2, a big nasty crease showed up in the kind of the crotch of that Y branch there. And this is a point where a lot of people, especially beginners, throw their hands in the air and say, the software is broken, this is awful, I don't like it, blah, blah, blah. And they write mad, nasty emails, and they say bad things about Tom and, you know, all that kind of stuff. That's not what's going on here. What's going on here is you have an unresolved inside corner, and that will resolve itself as we go around the model. So don't panic when you see those. Just continue, and I'll show you how to fix those as we go. So again, I'm going to turn this a little bit to get it to go around the corner. And I'm going to use, instead of just going with a straight off of this, I'm going to leave this patch here, and then I'm going to extrude off of this edge. So I'm going to alt drag off of this edge, and you'll notice another crease just showed up, but that's okay. So I'm going to keep going around the corner, rotate this a little bit. Rotate again. Rotate again. Again, I'm just toggling back and forth between the W and the E key on the keyboard to allow me to access the different modes here, and you can see how quickly that goes. So I've got my basic layout. I'm going to adjust this really quickly here to allow it to kind of follow the shape. And you'll notice you're starting to get a feel for this kind of gooey clay-like feel where you can just kind of pull stuff around and start seeing shapes develop. And so the last thing I need to do is I need to close this gap. So I'm going to pick these two verts, and I'm going to go to the weld button, which is here in the toolbar. And there's a cool thing about the weld key. If the Z is the hotkey for that, by the way. So you can either hit the weld button here, or you can hit the Z key on the keyboard once you have it selected. For this, I'm going to use the Z key because it's quick. If I pick one, hit the Z key or the weld button, and pick the other, you'll notice the first one jumped to the second one. If I pick this one, hit the weld key or the Z key, that one jumps to that one. If I pick them both and hit the weld button or the Z key, you'll notice that they jump together and average. And that's pretty much what I want. So I'm going to pick both of these, let them jump together and average. And you'll notice what happened is this model switched to box mode, which we'll get into a little bit as we're going through this. But that's okay. It's not broken. It had an issue in here. If you notice when I went, let me go back. You'll notice the reason it switched to box mode, you see this red point here? That's saying that there's a singular point that doesn't have any way to interpolate in any other direction, and so it can't resolve the model, and it can't resolve the model in smooth mode, so it switches to box mode to allow you a little bit easier time to diagnose what's going on. In this case, all I had to do was weld this, and you notice the red disappears. The model's closed up, and at this point, if I hit the tab key or toggle smooth, it should toggle smooth on me, which it did. Now, I still have a little bit of a crease down here, which is okay, because that's going to go away as soon as I thicken this. And a little bit of this, as you're learning, when you look at this stuff, you think, oh man, this thing's broken. Well, it kind of feels that way when you're first getting started, but that's not the case. You just need to keep kind of plowing ahead. So let's go to perspective view, and let's add a little bit of thickness to this thing. And basically what I'm going to do is just use the thicken tool, and I'm going to do this in object mode, although I don't think it's necessary. And I'm going to pick this, select the T-Splines to thicken, plus enter when done. I'm going to just right click. I'm going to just drag some thickness to this thing. And you'll notice that I get a nice smooth piece. We just laid out a paper doll and thickened. So now let's get into this a little bit and start making our details. The other thing that you'll notice is that crease disappeared. And the reason for that is now it has thickness and it can resolve in 3 directions instead of only 2. If it can only resolve in 2 directions, you're going to get a crease. So let's get in a little bit and we'll start picking edges. I'm going to just pick an edge, and I'm going to just adjust the shape of this real quick. And you get a feel for, if I had to adjust this model at a later date to fit somebody, how easy this would be, because as I move this thing around, you notice everything around it adjusts. And so all your curves and fillets and blends and all that kind of stuff that you typically would have to build in NURBS, you kind of get those for free here. And if you have to adjust them at a later date, they all update and adjust instead of blowing apart, which is usually what they do. So I'm just going to move this in real quickly like that. Okay. Nothing complicated here right now. I might change this rotation on this just a hair, just to get it a little bit more aiming where I want it. Same thing here. Any questions so far? Feel free to go ahead and shout them out. Matt and Juan are manning the switchboards here, so if there's anything going on there, go ahead and shout it out, and we'll deal with it as we go.
Yeah, pretty quiet crowd so far. But if anyone has any questions at all, just type them in the questions panel, and we'd love to address them.
Speechless. All right, so let's go and start throwing some shape in this thing. We made our paper dowel, we made our thicken, and now we need to start adding some shape in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click this edge, and if I double click it, you notice it runs all the way around there, which is not necessarily what I want. So I'm going to control drag and deselect all of those, and I'm just going to use my manipulator and pull this up. And you can see how the shape starts to develop almost like magic. And a little bit of a wonky transition right there, so I'm going to go to my vert, and I'm going to pull that down, the transition a little nicer. Same thing over here. I'm going to adjust this transition a little bit, make that be a little smoother so that it doesn't dig into your thumb. And you'll notice that it's really kind of almost there. If you imagine, sticking a thumb through that, you could see how it would fit right in there nicely. And so let's go in and adjust this just a little further. I'm going to grab these in here. I'm going to push this shape over a little bit. And you'll notice that as I push that internal edge, this one sharpened up a little bit because they got closer, and that's fine. That's kind of what I was going for. But this one moved, so I'm just going to grab it. And I'm going to use my construction plane manipulator here and just pull it back. And you can see how quickly that starts to develop. Now, this is still a little doughy, and I'd like to sharpen this up. And the back side of this, kind of as your thumb comes through there, you can imagine sticking your thumb through there. You wouldn't want this to be that kind of shape. You would want this to have a little bit of rise to it so that your thumb goes in there nicely. So we're just going to pull that in, and maybe we'll grab some verts here just to make that transition a little smoother. But you can see how the shape is adjusting as I do this. And let me, I usually do this and I didn't do it this time. Let me throw a better shader on this. This is we always get questions about this. This is the Oxpecker plugin for Rhino. It's going to kind of be obsoleted by version 5, so they're not doing a whole lot to develop it right now, but if you do a little bit of looking on the web, you can find it. If you can't find it, email me, Kyle@tsplines.com, and I will send you a link to Dropbox it, because we always get questions about that. So you can notice that what's happening here, you can see how gorgeous this has started to develop, and we can mess around with this in real time. If we were chasing highlights, we could mess around with this in real time and watch the highlights go. But for this case, it would be something that we would want to fit somebody. And so you can grab a point and start moving this around and see, kind of get a feel for how this thing is going to fit a hand. Obviously, if we had a hand buck or something like that, we'd throw it in there. But look at this transition. Look at this absolutely gorgeous transition in and out of there with almost no effort whatsoever. Don't tell my clients how easy this is to do. And you can very quickly start to kind of get the feel for how this thing would come together. So let's sharpen this edge up a little bit because this is a little doughy back here. And the other thing is maybe I want to cave this in a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick this edge and I'm going to double click on it. It's going to run too far. And I'm going to back off just a little bit so that I have that outside edge selected. And then I'm going to insert an edge by using the Insert Edge Simple by left-clicking on this button here. And I'm just going to drag an edge in here. And you'll notice that what's happening down here is it's actually stopping. It's not running through the model, which is okay because it's T-Splines, and T-Splines is good like that. So I can just throw an edge in here. You'll notice that it'll update. This sharpens up a little bit because there's more information there. And now I have more stuff that I can play with. And if I wanted to, say, tuck this in, I can do that. And maybe I'll pull it down a little bit because it sharpened that top edge a little. But you'll notice that by allowing that detail to tee off, it allows me to add localized detail in here and get a really nice kind of crisp edge around here, but it blends out and flows nicely into this softer edge through here, which is cool. That's what I wanted. Now, let's deal a little bit with this backside in here. This is a little bit of a doughy transition here. So let's go ahead and pick this edge, and I can either double click it or pick a single edge and hit the L key, which selects the edge loop. And I'm going to back this one off. One, insert another edge here. And you'll notice two things will happen. This will sharpen up here, and it gives me the ability to start manipulating the back here. And very quickly, in about 13 minutes or 14 minutes, we've got this really kind of fantastic shape that's watertight, bomb-proof, and ready to roll. It needs an adjustment right there. Sorry. I always run the risk of overindulging my designer geek on these things, so if I space out for a minute and just start making shapes, tell Matt to ping me. All right, so let's go to the top view again and take a look at, see how we're doing with our reference image. And I have plenty of information in here now, so the last thing I need to do is just come in here really quickly and adjust this shape a little bit. And you'll see it all updates really nicely. Now you can imagine how easy it would be if you were in a situation where you didn't RP part of this, and like the stupid kitchen scissors I have in my kitchen right now that fit my wife's thumb perfectly but stick to mine, like kindergarten scissors, and needed to adjust it, all you need to do is come in here, grab this edge, scale it out a little bit, and you'd have a better fit for a big gorilla hand like mine. All right. So we already built one side, and we have plenty of time, so let's go ahead and do this with the other side.
So, Kyle, before you start this one question that came in is if you wanted to start out by using curves in Rhino, is there any way that you could do that?
Yeah, I mean, you could. I think that for this webinar, I like to focus on something that's like cinder block simple that you could get away with, and this to me is probably the simplest way to approach that. If you wanted to work from curves, what I would probably do is I'd lay out a curve from here to here, a curve from here to here, and a curve from here to here, and then either use the loft command or loft it in Rhino and convert it to T-splines, and then I'd probably do 3 curves through here and lay them out in space, and again either loft them in Rhino and convert it, and then weld them here and here. We can do that for the second one. You want me to do that for the second one?
Good. I mean, I guess the other way to work from a curve is to just extrude the curve. So if you had that like on the inside of the handle and then just extruded it outwards.
Yeah. The only issue with that is if your curve is not set up correctly to start with, you can get into situations where you've got a million points on one curve and not enough on the other, and welding that stuff together can be a little bit of an issue. But let's do that for this one. Matt has thrown down the gauntlet here, so let's do it. So we're going to start with just a regular curve. At least he didn't take my hotkeys away this time. All right, and I'm going to clean this curve up a little bit because it's really nasty. Again, the T-Spline's manipulator works on the curve, so I can pick just regular CV points and move them around. And so the way that we're going to build this one is I'm going to extrude the curve to get a ring of edge, and then I'm going to thicken that curve just like we did over here, so that I'll have essentially a torus or a donut that's kind of this weird hot dog shape. And then I'll extrude some faces off the edge to get this. So this will be a little bit different workflow, but it's still a really simple way to go. So the first thing I'm going to do, just out of habit's sake, I'm going to pick this curve and I'm going to use the Rhino rebuild function. And it's got 25 points in it right now. I'm going to try and reduce that a little bit. If you notice, I can go to 15 points and I still get a really good, oh, actually I take that back, let's go the other direction. Duh. All right, so I'm gonna just rebuild it at 15 points. You'll notice it pulled a little bit down here, but that's okay. I'm going to accept that, and if I look at my point structure now, it's a lot more even and a little bit better laid out than the way I did it. So then I'm going to come in here just really quickly and just adjust a little bit of shape. Everything else looks all right. Okay. So I'm going to pick this. I'm going to control spacebar to get my hotkey up. And in this case, what I'm going to do, instead of alt dragging on the translate, I'm going to alt drag on the scale. And I'm just going to go right in the center here because it's a 2D object anyways. And if I alt drag on the scale, you'll notice that it pulls a ring of edges out. And I have a surface there. So now all I need to do is just come in here and very quickly hit the W key, go to the translate manipulator, move these around.
Yeah, and one note is if you move that pivot point of the scale manipulator, it can probably scale a little bit better towards the center.
Yeah, it definitely would have. So this keeps you from having to chase them around. The reason I do this, I don't want to bash this as a workflow. I actually do this fairly frequently. But if I'm searching for something and I don't really know how the thing is going to lay out, I find that if I use that kind of a pen face, that it forces me to think about how the thing is going to lay out and how everything is going to flow together. And sometimes it can help me if I'm searching for an object or I'm searching for a shape. It can help me lay it out a little cleaner than it would if I tried to go with curves. I tend to make a mess with curves. I try and do it as simple as I possibly can. So same thing. I have my faces laid out here. I'm gonna pick this. I'm gonna thicken. I'm gonna drag up a little bit and accept it, and I'm gonna get this nice torus shape. And so then I need to add this extension out here. So I'm going to pick this face and this face. And just like we did with the curve or with the faces, I'm going to alt drag on the C-plane icon here. And you'll notice that I'll get some extruded faces out of there. And I'm going to drag maybe one more. Like that. And if I go to my top view, grab some edges. And this one I'm going to scale it. I'm going to hit my T key, move my manipulator, and I'm going to scale it from here. And you'll notice that that allows me to flatten out that edge a little bit to match my reference a little more closely. Look at that. Any questions on that? You guys like that one better, or you like the other one? All right, so let's add this little appendage down here, and then we'll pretty much have the basics of this model. We can go in and adjust it. Let me shade this again so you can see it. Let me put a better shader on here. If you're using this plugin, by the way, you have to pick object before you assign it, otherwise it won't assign. And I'm just going to lock this one for right now. So we need to add this little appendage sticking out of here. So I'm just going to grab this face by hitting the D key or clicking up here through the manipulator. I'm going to pick that. I'm going to just Alt drag. You'll see that it just adds another little piece of detail out there. And all I have to do is go into my edges and adjust the shape of that. You can see how convenient the 3D gumball is as far as doing this kind of stuff. And for the most part, I think we're in good shape on that. May just do a few little adjustments. You notice as you make these adjustments how smoothly it goes in and out of the geometry around it. So all right, let's sharpen up the edge of that handle a little bit. I'm going to double click on this edge, or hit the L key, and I'm going to pull this down just a little bit. And I'm going to double click on that edge. I'm going to shut that one off and those two so that I'm just moving it here. I'm going to give that a little bit of a pull right there. I want to drop these a little bit. To adjust that lead in. And then I'm going to go into my points, sync this one, sync this one. You can do this off an edge too, but and adjust that a little bit so it's a little smoother in and out. Let's add an edge ring down here to sharpen the edge of this internal thing up a little bit. So I'm going to insert edge simple and drag out probably about there and drop it. And you'll notice that this edge just sharpened up a bunch. And maybe we'll tighten this up in here. Again, I don't want to kill you guys watching me design this thing on the fly, but I just want to show you that it can be done. The thing that I like about this is that a lot of software that, as you're working, forces you to put on this hat of, okay, I'm a CAD model maker, and I have a drawing, and I'm trying to match my drawing, and I need to match this curve, and I need to match that curve, and I need to make sure that all this stuff matches my drawing. Well, the problem with a 2D drawing is 99% of the time they're wrong. They don't line up, they don't look good, they have magical shapes that are absolutely impossible to create in 3D. You get things that don't line up and projections that don't match and all that kind of crazy stuff. Anybody who's tried to match a drawing is familiar with that scenario. The thing that I like about T-splines is the fact that you can start with almost nothing as far as reference is concerned. You notice on both of these, this is just something I grabbed off the web, as a basic reference, and you have enough freedom that you can actually design in 3D instead of just trying to make a model. You can actually come in and make design decisions about how the thing looks. You say, well, maybe this thing, it would be cool if it had a little kink in it here. Maybe it would be cool if it had a little thumb rest or something like that. And it's like, especially if you have access to an RP printer at a company, you can try this stuff. You can say, well, how's that thumb rest feel? How does it feel if it's out like this? How does it feel if it's up like this? How does it feel if it's down like there? And in about, as fast as you can hit save as, you can create iterations that allow you to, create stuff that quite possibly could end up being better than what you would have come up with if you had just tried to match your sketch, because matching sketches is hard and dragging T-spline stuff around is easy. So it's a really kind of a cool way to work, because you're making your decisions in 3D, which is where your decisions should be made anyways, right? Because that's where it either does or does not work in 3D. I'm going to add one more edge here just because I'm a nerd and I can't stand it.
So Kyle, just while you're touching this up, a couple of questions that are coming in.
Yeah.
So one question is, can you make an absolutely sharp end where the metal part starts and still be the same surface and watertight? So can you get, I guess maybe that would be asking, can you get C0 perfectly sharp creases?
Around this edge down here?
Sure.
The way that I personally would do that is to pick these two faces and delete them. And you'll notice that the end of that thing opens up, and then I would, quite honestly, personally, my workflow would be to actually, the way that I would do this is to pull this past where it needs to be. I would convert this to a NURB surface and then trim it either with a wire cut or with just a trim curve, and cap it, and then you're going to end up with a watertight poly surface. But I think what you were asking is, can you crease this edge here? And I believe you can by picking these edges here and throwing a crease on them. Now the problem is that it's going to chase that crease through the model, which may or may not be what you want. So if I crease that, you notice that it put a sharp edge on it, but the problem is, since you put a crease on there, it's assuming that this is only a 2D resolution down here, and it's shooting that crease through the model. And the crease needs 2 full surfaces before it can peter out. And it doesn't have enough room to run here, so it's shooting a crease through the model. So I don't really like that as a solution. The other way that you could do it would be to add edges in here to sharpen this up.
Yeah, can you just maybe show the conversion to NURBS? I mean, it's trivial, but I think it's worth showing how easy that is.
Yeah, let's do this. And this is where I get up on my soapbox and talk about how how easy it is once you have a new tool to say, ooh, I have a new tool. I don't need to remember anything about any of my old tools. Well, don't forget, Rhino's really awesome, and that's the reason you were using it in the first place. So let's put a sharp edge on this. I'm going to go to object mode. I used T-splines to make this organic model, which would have been really hard to make in Rhino, and then I convert it back to NURBS just by hitting the convert button, right-clicking the convert button. I'm going to hide my original T-splines object, and now I've got a watertight polysurface.
Can you show that in shaded mode?
Yes. So if I go to my top view, got to purge my history. If I go to my top view, now all I need to do is throw a curve through here. I can wire cut it. Flip this. And I've got a nice hard edge. I can also fillet this. One of the nice things about the T-spline's geometry is it's really high quality. And if I throw a fillet on this, that might be a little big, but yeah, it's too big for that corner. Still too big. I got a tight radius on that edge. Can't make a bigger fillet in the corner. There we go. And that is not a geometry issue, that's a display issue with the mesh.
Yeah, but those types of hard details, whether you want to add those in Rhino or whether you want to bring the T-spline models in iGES into SolidWorks or Pro-E, I think that's exactly where T-spline's interfaces with these other tools is giving you the organic shape and then giving you the nice geometry that you can then add those hard features with.
I almost always add all of my hard features in Rhino because the Booleans work great on T-spline stuff, fillets work great on T-spline stuff, you know, intersections, all that kind of stuff works really well because the T-spline's geometry is watertight, and so you get the benefit of being able to create, you know, really great organic shapes in T-splines, but you go back and you use all the Rhino tools that you already know how to use that already work great. So, you know, use the right tool for the job. Don't pound in screws with a hammer. Make sure that you're using a screwdriver to put in screws and a hammer to put in nails, and use each tool for what it's, you know, what it's best at. So
yeah, it's worth noting that once you do turn that T-splines into NURBS, it's kind of a one-way street. So you won't want to go back and convert that to T-splines and then edit it, because going to NURBS will add some additional geometry. So you'll always want to save a copy of that T-spline either in the layers or in the file, and then you'll go back to that T-spline and edit that.
Yeah. So in this case, you know, I have the T-spline from the original Rhino, from the original conversion, and if I need to edit it, then I would obviously keep my trim curves and stuff like that, and I would edit it and then go back and try from there. So if you're doing an RP part on this, I would RP this, test it, and once you know that you've got the right shape and you know that you've got the right fit, then you can go down the line and add all the rest of your details and finish it up.
Yeah. So here's another question. How about in case CAD with respect to mechanical design if the user wants to specify the dimensions of the objects?
Well, that would be a matter of just laying out your original model, and basically you just go in and lay it out like you would any other CAD model. If you know you needed 2 inches right here, or an inch and something right here, I'd specify an inch and build around that. So you can build all of your original dimensions and use this workflow here where we're extruding from curves. But as far as like being mathematically precise and saying, okay, well I need an 80 thousandths radius or something here, that's not how T-Spline works. So if you need that kind of stuff, then what I would do is I would build the model with, quite honestly, I'd build it with creases in it, and then go back and do your fillets in SolidWorks or Rhino or something like that. But I found out that in most cases, if you're doing something that needs to be organic in the first place, having a mathematical fillet running through it typically is not, kind of the design intent. So, that's kind of.
Yeah, and I guess just the other point to add is, if you do have your T-Spline organic part, and then you need to transition that into some more exact dimension parts, there are a few ways to do that. We have a T-Spline's match command that you can use. You can also use the Rhino blend commands. You can blend off of a T-Spline's edge into some other geometry as well.
Yeah. And there's an example of that in the tutorials on the webpage of I think it was I can't remember which one it was. It was either the helicopter. No, it was the tips and tricks webinar. There's an example of using the Rhino blend surf to go to a T-Spline's object without destroying the nerves. So
yeah, and we can send out a link to that.
Yeah. So so I think we're sitting at 10 o'clock right now. I think we're going to try and hold that hour. If you were to build the blades, obviously you could build this with the Rhino loft command and just make these hard, because these are hard edges, so it would most likely be using the Rhino edge command or the Rhino commands instead of T-Splines, and then use the T-Splines objects for to enjoy all the benefits of the organic stuff. Use Rhino to enjoy all the benefits of traditional NURBS modeling, and then let the two kind of live together in the same space, and you end up with something better than you would have if you didn't have one or the other.
Okay. Well, we do have as you leave the webinar, we do have a survey that will pop up after you close your browser, and if you could just answer those questions, we would appreciate that to give us some feedback as far as how we can improve these webinars each time. And so you can definitely add any other questions there, but if anyone has any final questions for Kyle now, I think we probably have another minute or two. Just go ahead and type those in.
I'm just going to. There's one question in there about beginning a model from a scanned image, but if you don't have that, if you used to work off of curves. Yeah, we talked about that. The other thing that I've actually done is I'll take a scanned image and then I'll go into Photoshop and I'll just, just beat lines over it in Photoshop as a bitmap and then bring that in and use it and then start with curves. It's kind of the same type of workflow. Excuse me, my coffee's going down the wrong pipe here. It's just as easy to work off a bitmap as you would for a standard Rhino model as you would in T-Splines. In fact, I find it easier because of the kind of the ability to be able to push and pull stuff.
So maybe here's one final question about someone working on a hard hat design and wanting to know how to make a hole that goes from two surfaces. I don't know if this is the best geometry to show on that, Kyle, but if you could maybe just show how to maybe make a bridge between two surfaces to make a hole or a tunnel.
Absolutely. Well, let's make it here. We'll do this. So there's that. Let me all right. So let me pick this, and I'm going to get rid of these faces. Get rid of these faces. And this. Hide everything else. Let me get rid of this bitmap so it's not distracting. Alright, and then I'm going to just copy paste this. And I'm going to scale it a little bit. So I've got two surfaces, right? And I'm going to subdivide both of these so that I've got some more geometry. Make sure that I've got everything. And that kind of got a little nasty up there.
Yeah, spheres are weird because they got that degenerate point on top.
Yeah, I'll subdivide exact, and that way it's got it. So basically, if I look at this, I've got an inside surface and an outside surface, and I need to put a hole in it. And the size of the hole is going to be determined by the size of your face. So if I delete this, it's going to throw a crease through there, which is fine. But I've got two holes in here, so my hole is approximately going to be about this size. I don't need to have a hole in it. What I'm going to pick these two faces, and I'm just going to use the bridge tool, which is here. And if I click that, you'll notice that I've pre-selected them. I want to make sure that my corners match and my arrows match so that I know I'm going in the right direction. And I bridge between those, and you'll notice what happens is typically when you bridge, like if I bridge from edge to edge, it'll go from here to here and it'll close this volume, whereas if I go face to face and it's inside, it'll actually make a hole through the model. Well, once the hole's through the model, let me get rid of this. Once the hole's through the model, then you have edges just like you do with anything else, and you can come in here and manipulate the shape of this hole. So that's how you would do it. If you needed a specific shaped hole, you could use the match command and loft into that, or use the Rhino blend curve or blend surface or anything like that. But that's the typical kind of workflow how you would make holes and stuff.